The Arizona desert wanted to kill her. 8-year-old Sloan Mercer stood blindfolded in the middle of nowhere, her small hands trembling at her sides. The afternoon sun hammered down at 110 degrees, turning the air into something you could chew. Sweat soaked through her thin cotton shirt and pooled in the small of her back. She could taste salt on her cracked lips. Somewhere behind her, boots crunched on gravel. 47 pieces. Her grandfather's voice rolled across the sand like distant thunder. 3 different rifles. I have scattered them in a 20-foot radius around you. Sloan swallowed hard. Her throat felt like sandpaper. You have until sundown to build me one working weapon. The old man's voice carried no sympathy, no warmth, just the cold, hard edge of a command. That is 4 hours, little one. Plenty of time if you do not panic. Grandpa, I cannot do this. Cannot is a word for quitters. His boots moved closer. She could smell the coffee and gun oil that always clung to him like a second skin. Master Gunnery Sergeant Emmett Mercer had retired from the Marine Corps before Sloan was born, but the Corps had never retired from him. Even at 74, he moved like a predator. Quiet, deliberate, dangerous. You want to go back to the house, he asked? Sit in the air conditioning? Watch cartoons like other kids? Sloan shook her head fiercely. Then find the pieces. Build the rifle. Do it before that sun touches the mountains. Or we start over tomorrow with 4 rifles instead of 3. She heard him walking away. The crunch of his boots faded until there was nothing but the whisper of hot wind and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Sloan Mercer took a deep breath, and she got to work. The blindfold stayed on. That was the rule. Her grandfather believed that true mastery came from knowing your weapon so intimately that sight became irrelevant. A real shooter, he said, feels the metal like it is part of their own body. They know where it hurts. Sloan dropped to her knees and began to crawl. The sand burned through her jeans. Her palms pressed against rocks that had been baking in the sun for hours. Each touch was a small agony, but she kept moving, sweeping her hands in wide arcs, searching. Her fingers found the first piece buried 3 inches beneath the surface, a bolt carrier group coated with grit. She could tell by the weight, by the distinctive shape of the gas key. She set it aside and kept searching. The second piece was easier, a barrel assembly, half hidden beneath a creosote bush. The third was a trigger housing. The fourth, a magazine well. Piece by piece, she assembled her collection, using touch alone to identify each component. Some pieces did not match. Her grandfather had mixed parts from 3 different weapons. A Remington 700 bolt would not fit an AR-15 receiver. A shotgun trigger guard was useless for a hunting rifle. She had to sort through the chaos and find the combination that would actually work. The sun crawled across the sky. Sloan's lips cracked and bled. Her fingers blistered from the hot metal. Twice she cut herself on sharp edges and blood mixed with the sand that coated her hands. But she did not stop. She did not quit. 3 hours and 47 minutes after she began, Sloan Mercer pulled back the blindfold and looked down at the weapon in her hands. A functioning Remington 700 hunting rifle. Bolt action, 5-round internal magazine, every piece properly assembled, every component in its correct position. She cycled the action. Smooth, clean, perfect. Her grandfather's shadow fell across her. She looked up to find him standing there, his weathered face unreadable in the fading light. He took the rifle from her trembling hands and inspected it himself. His calloused fingers moved over the weapon with the casual expertise of a man who had spent 50 years making machines of death do his bidding. He cycled the bolt. He checked the trigger pull. He examined the barrel alignment. Then he set the rifle aside and knelt down, his old knees creaking until his eyes were level with hers. Pain is information, he said quietly. It tells you what you can endure. Most people run from pain. They never learn what they are capable of. His hard face softened just for a moment. You did not run, little one. You did not quit. And now you know something that can never be taken from you. What is that, Grandpa? That you are stronger than you think. He reached out and wiped the blood from her hands with his own bandana. The gesture was surprisingly gentle from a man who had spent 3 decades killing America's enemies in wars that would never be acknowledged. "There is something else I need to tell you," he said. "Something about who I am, about who you are." Sloan waited. "During the Korean War, I served as a scout sniper with the 1st Marine Division. Winter of 1952, the Chosin Reservoir." She had heard of Chosin. Every military family knew that name. It was where 17,000 American soldiers had been surrounded by over 100,000 Chinese troops. It was where temperatures dropped to 30 below zero. It was where men froze to death in their foxholes, and the walking wounded became the fighting wounded because there was no other choice. It was where legends were born. "The Chinese had a name for me," her grandfather continued. "They called me the Phantom of Chosin, because I would walk through their lines at night, alone, and in the morning there would be officers who never woke up, sentries who never finished their watch, radio operators who never sent their last transmission." His eyes grew distant, looking at something far beyond the Arizona desert. "I did things in Korea that still are not in any official record. And after Korea, I did 30 more years of work that will never be acknowledged, in places that officially do not exist, eliminating targets whose names were redacted from every document." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because what I am teaching you is not a game, little one. It is not a hobby. It is not something to impress your friends with. It is a legacy." He placed his hand on her shoulder. "The Mercer family has served this country for 4 generations. My father was at Belleau Wood. I was at Chosin. And someday the world is going to need you to be somewhere that matters." He stood up, his joints popping, and retrieved the rifle she had built. "You proved something today. You proved you have what it takes. But this is just the beginning. The real training starts now." Sloan looked at her bloody hands. She looked at the rifle. She looked at her grandfather, this old warrior who had walked through fire and come out the other side. "I am ready," she said. Emmett Mercer smiled. It was the first time she had ever seen him smile. "Good, because Mercers do not break. We bend the world until it fits us." From that day forward, Sloan's education began in earnest. Not just shooting, though there was plenty of that. Emmett taught her to read wind by the way grass moved. He taught her to calculate bullet drop in her head, accounting for altitude, humidity, temperature, and the rotation of the earth itself. He taught her to clean a weapon by touch alone, to feel for imperfections the way a surgeon feels for tumors. Every summer she returned to Arizona. Every summer the tests grew harder. At 10 she learned to shoot between heartbeats. "Your heart beats 60 times a minute," Emmett explained during one scorching afternoon at the range. "That is 60 moments of motion, 60 tiny earthquakes running through your body. But between each beat, there is a pause, a stillness. That is when you squeeze the trigger. That is when you send your message." At 12, she could outshoot most adults at the local range. The other shooters would watch her, this slight girl with the ancient eyes, and they would shake their heads in disbelief as she put round after round through the same hole at 100 yards. At 14, Emmett blindfolded her again. But this time, he did not scatter rifle parts in the sand. He took her into the mountains at midnight with nothing but a compass and a knife and told her to find her way home. The desert at night was a different world, cold instead of hot, silent instead of screaming with insects. The stars overhead were so bright they seemed close enough to touch, but the terrain was treacherous, ravines hidden in shadow, cacti waiting to tear flesh, predators hunting in the darkness. She got lost twice. She ran out of water on the second day. She twisted her ankle on a loose rock and had to fashion a splint from a dead branch and strips torn from her shirt. But she did not quit. She did not call for help. She navigated by the stars, the way her grandfather had taught her. She found water in a canyon where morning dew collected on the rocks. She kept moving, one painful step at a time, until she saw the lights of his house in the distance. She arrived at his doorstep, dehydrated, sunburned, and covered in cactus scratches. But she arrived. "You look terrible," Emmett said. "I made it." "You did. Now we will do it again next month. Faster this time." They did, and the month after that, and the month after that. By the time she turned 16, Sloane could survive alone in the desert for a week. She could navigate without a compass. She could find water where there seemed to be none. She could make fire without matches and shelter without tools. She had developed a reputation at every shooting range within 100 miles of Phoenix. By 18, she was competing at the national level. By 21, she had standing offers from 3 Olympic shooting teams. She turned them all down. Why? Her grandfather asked. For once, his voice held something other than instruction. It held curiosity. Because that is not why you taught me. You did not teach me to win medals. You taught me to serve. Emmett Mercer, the Phantom of Chasen, the ghost who had walked through hell and come out the other side, smiled for the second time. Then go serve. And when the time comes, when they underestimate you, when they doubt you, when they try to break you, remember what you are. What am I? You are a Mercer. His eyes glittered with something fierce and proud. And Mercers do not break. See the one and no one in Mr. Thun. That was 5 years ago. Now Sloane stood in the armory of Forward Operating Base Jaguar, deep in the Colombian jungle, and she felt that same desert heat crawling up her spine. Not from the temperature. The FOB was air-conditioned to a crisp 68 degrees, but from the way Lieutenant Dalton Vickers was looking at her, like she was something he had scraped off his boot. Mercer. Vickers pronounced her name like it left a bad taste in his mouth. He stood by the weapon racks, a wall of muscle wrapped in digital camouflage. His jaw was carved from granite. His eyes were cold as a Minnesota winter. You are with us tomorrow. Sloane kept her face neutral. Yes, sir. Ghost walk. Reconnaissance only. We go in, we observe, we extract. No contact with hostile forces. Vickers ran his hand along a row of pristine HK-46 assault rifles, each one gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Think you can handle that, analyst? The word dripped with contempt. Around the armory, the other members of SEAL Team 7 watched the exchange with varying degrees of amusement. Chief Petty Officer Brennan Holt leaned against a storage locker, his weathered face unreadable. The others made no effort to hide their smirks. Sergeant Morrison, Corporal Whitmore, Sergeant Kowalski, Private First Class Garrett. To them, Sloane Mercer was a joke. She was 5'5" in a world of 6-foot warriors, 130 pounds in a room full of men who could bench press her with one arm. She had been attached to the team 3 weeks ago as an intelligence specialist, brought in for her fluency in Spanish and her expertise in cartel communication patterns. But to the door kickers, the pipe hitters, the men who lived and breathed combat, she was dead weight, excess baggage, a liability waiting to happen. I can handle it, sir. Vickers smiled. It was the kind of smile a wolf gives a rabbit right before the chase begins. He reached up to the top rack and pulled down a rifle. Even from 5 feet away, Sloane could see it was wrong. The finish was worn down to bare metal in patches. The stock had a hairline crack running along the grip. When Vickers turned it over, the bolt carrier group rattled loosely, a sound that made Sloane's stomach tighten. This one is yours. He tossed it to her. Sloane caught it, nearly stumbling under the sudden weight combined with her gear. The rifle felt wrong in her hands. Unbalanced. Sick. She pulled back the charging handle and inspected the chamber. The inside was dry and gritty, coated with a film of carbon buildup that looked like it had not been cleaned in months. She checked the extractor, the small claw responsible for pulling spent casings from the chamber. Her heart sank. The extractor spring was bent. Not badly, not obviously, but enough. Under rapid fire, it would fail to grip the casing properly. The spent round would stay lodged in the chamber while the next round tried to feed in behind it. A jam, guaranteed. Sir, Sloane kept her voice steady. Professional. The extractor spring on this unit is compromised. It is going to fail under rapid fire. The armory went dead silent. The other men exchanged glances. A few of them chuckled, low and mean. Vickers stepped closer. He towered over her, close enough that she could see the individual pores on his nose, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the absolute contempt swimming in his pale blue eyes. You are an analyst, Mercer. His voice was soft, dangerous. You read maps. You intercept radio chatter. You sit in air-conditioned rooms and drink coffee while real operators do the actual work. He leaned in closer. You do not tell me about hardware. Lieutenant, with respect, this is what is left. Vickers cut her off with a gesture at the weapon racks. Budget cuts, equipment shortages, you know how it is. Another wolf smile. If you cannot handle a little grit in your gear, maybe you should have stayed in the intel van back in Virginia. Sloan felt the eyes of the entire team on her. She felt the weight of their judgment, their dismissal, their absolute certainty that she did not belong. She thought about her grandfather. She thought about the desert. She thought about standing blindfolded in the killing heat, her fingers bleeding from digging through hot sand, assembling a working rifle from scattered pieces while the sun tried to cook her alive. It is a safety hazard, sir. I am required to report. Report what? Vickers was smiling now, really smiling, enjoying himself. That you do not like your assignment? That the equipment is not good enough for the princess from Naval Intelligence? He shook his head slowly. Here is what is going to happen, Mercer. You are going to take that rifle. You are going to carry it into the jungle tomorrow. And you are going to stay behind us. Keep your head down and try not to get us killed. He turned away, then paused. If you are scared, ring the bell. He said it loud enough for everyone to hear. We will find you a seat on the next helicopter back to the States. No shame in admitting you are not cut out for this. More laughter from the team. Vickers reached into an ammunition crate and pulled out a single magazine. 30 rounds of 5.56 NATO. He held it up between two fingers like it was a piece of garbage. One mag, make it count, sweetheart. He tossed it to her and walked out. The other operators filed out after him, still chuckling, leaving Sloan alone in the armory with her broken rifle and her single magazine and the weight of everything they expected her to fail at. She looked down at the weapon in her hands. This was not bad luck. This was not budget cuts. Vickers had deliberately chosen the worst rifle in the armory. He had handpicked a weapon designed to fail, and he had given her just enough ammunition to get herself killed. Where's that Dewurnum? That night, Sloan lay on her cot in the tiny corner of the barracks they had assigned her. A hanging sheet separated her from the rest of the team. It did nothing to block sound. She could hear them talking, laughing. Someone was doing an impression of her voice, high and whiny. The extractor spring is compromised, sir. It is a safety hazard, sir. More laughter. She is going to get somebody killed out there. That was Morrison. $100 says she freezes up the first time a round cracks over her head. Kowalski. I give her 2 miles before she is begging for a break. Those intel types are soft. All that time sitting behind desks, they forget how to use their legs. Whitmore. Vickers should not have let her come. This voice was quieter, more serious. Chief Holt. She is not trained for this. If things go sideways, things are not going to go sideways. Vickers, confident and dismissive. It is a ghost walk, in and out. The hardest part of her day is going to be keeping up. Sloan closed her eyes. She had heard it all before. Different teams, different missions, different men, but always the same words. Soft, weak, liability, princess. They saw her silence as submission. They saw her compliance as fear. They saw her small frame and quiet voice and assumed she was everything they expected her to be. They did not know about the weekends. They did not know about the summers in Arizona, when most kids were at baseball camp or swimming pools, and she was in the desert with a blindfold over her eyes and rifle parts scattered in the sand. They did not know about Master Gunnery Sergeant Emmett Mercer. Her grandfather had taught her things that could not be found in any manual. He had taught her to read wind by the way grass moved. He had taught her to calculate bullet drop in her head, accounting for altitude, humidity, temperature, and the rotation of the earth. He had taught her to clean a weapon by touch alone, to feel for imperfections the way a surgeon feels for tumors. But more than that, he had taught her to think. The gun is not just a tool, he would say, his voice like gravel rolling downhill. It is an extension of your body, an extension of your will. You must know it better than you know yourself. She learned to strip and reassemble every rifle in his collection blindfolded. She learned to diagnose problems by sound alone. The subtle click of a worn sear, the gritty slide of a fouled bolt carrier, the metallic ping of a weakened spring. By the time she joined the Navy, Sloane could outshoot most instructors. But she never bragged. She never showed off. She kept her head down and did her job, waiting for the moment when her skills would actually matter. That moment was coming. She could feel it. Indani in such interminamus. Sloane got up from her cot. The team had finally gone quiet, their laughter fading into sleep. Through the thin walls of the barracks, she could hear the jungle sounds, the chirp of insects, the distant call of nocturnal birds, the constant drip of condensation falling from leaves. She picked up the broken rifle. In the dim light of her corner, she began to examine it properly. Not just a quick inspection this time, but a thorough, systematic evaluation. Her fingers moved over the weapon like a surgeon's hands exploring a patient. The extractor spring was worse than she had thought. Not just bent, fatigued, metal crystallization at the stress points. It had maybe 300 rounds left in it before catastrophic failure, probably less under jungle conditions. The bolt carrier group was loose because two of the gas rings were cracked. The gas system itself was partially clogged with carbon, which would cause cycling issues. The firing pin showed signs of wear that suggested it had been dry-fired repeatedly. In short, the rifle was a disaster. But it was the disaster she had been given. Sloane thought about the desert. She thought about those 47 pieces scattered in the sand. She thought about her grandfather's voice. "You have until sundown, plenty of time if you do not panic." She could not fix the extractor spring. She could not replace the gas rings. She could not undo the damage that neglect and abuse had inflicted on this weapon, but she could work with what she had. From her personal kit, she pulled out a small bottle of CLP, cleaning, lubricating, and protecting solution. She had acquired it from the helicopter mechanic earlier that day, trading a favor she would have to repay later. The mechanic had not asked why a naval intelligence analyst needed gun oil. Smart man. Slowly, methodically, Sloane began to clean the rifle. She worked the bolt carrier until it moved like silk. She flushed the gas tube with solvent until the carbon deposits broke free. She applied oil to every friction point. Not too much because excess lubricant attracted dust, but just enough to give the damaged components a fighting chance. The extractor spring was still compromised. Nothing she could do about that, but she could work around it. If she kept the chamber clean and wet, the spent casings would eject more easily. If she did not fire too rapidly, she could give the weakened spring time to recover between shots. And if a jam occurred, when a jam occurred, she knew exactly how to clear it. Tap, rack, assess. Her grandfather had drilled it into her over 10,000 repetitions. When your weapon fails, he had said, you have 2 seconds to fix it or you are dead. Amateurs freeze. Professionals adapt. Your hands must know what to do before your brain catches up. Sloane finished her work as the first gray light of dawn began to filter through the barracks windows. She had not slept. Her eyes burned with fatigue. Her fingers ached from hours of repetitive motion. But the rifle was as ready as she could make it. Now she just had to survive the men who wanted her to fail. A sound made her turn. Chief Petty Officer Brennan Holt stood at the edge of her sleeping area, the hanging sheet pushed aside. He had approached silently, with the practiced stealth of a man who had spent 20 years learning to move without being heard. His weathered face was unreadable in the dim light. "Cannot sleep?" he asked. "Something like that." Holt's eyes moved from her face to the rifle in her hands. He studied it for a long moment. "That weapon is a piece of junk." Vickers pulled it from the disposal pile. It was scheduled for decommissioning. "I know, Chief." "You knew?" A frown. "And you did not report it higher?" "I did report it. Lieutenant Vickers told me to handle it." Holt's jaw tightened. He glanced back toward where Vickers was sleeping, then looked at Sloane again. "That rifle is going to jam on you. You know that, right? First time you need it, it is going to fail." Sloane met his eyes steadily. "Then I will clear the jam, Chief." "You cannot clear a broken extractor in the middle of a firefight. Watch me." Something flickered in Holt's weathered face. Something that looked almost like respect. He reached into his cargo pocket and pulled out a spare magazine. 30 rounds. He held it out to her. "Vickers only gave you 1 mag," he said. That is not enough for a recon patrol. Sloan stared at the magazine, then at Holt. Chief Iowa, take it. His voice was gruff, uncomfortable. And keep your head down out there, Mercer. I have lost enough teammates. I do not need to lose another one because some officer has got a point to prove. He turned to leave, then paused. I have been doing this job for 20 years. You learn to read people. And from the first day you arrived, something about you did not add up. What do you mean? You were too quiet, too patient, too willing to take the abuse without fighting back. He shook his head slowly. People who are actually weak do not act that way. They complain. They make excuses. They look for sympathy. You just kept your head down and did your job. What did that tell you? That you are either broken or dangerous, maybe both. He walked away before she could respond. Sloan looked at the magazine in her hands. 30 extra rounds. Not much. Barely a few seconds of sustained fire. But from a man who had given her nothing but silence since her arrival, it felt like something more. She slipped the magazine into a hidden pocket and returned to her work. The jungle pressed in around them in the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the mountains like a warning, and Sloan Mercer prepared for war. The morning briefing was short and brutal. Simple reconnaissance, Vickers said, pointing to a map of the target area. Colombian jungle, approximately 15 clicks from the Peruvian border. We have got reports of cartel activity, possible drug processing facility, possible weapons cache. Our job is to get eyes on, confirm or deny, and extract. He looked around the room at his team. Standard formation, Morrison on point, Holt at rear. Kowalski carries the heavy kit. Whitmore handles comms. Garrett runs overwatch with the long gun. A pause. Mercer walks center, carries the extra radio batteries. Morrison whistled. That is 40 extra pounds, Lieutenant. She wanted to come. Vickers shrugged. She can carry her weight. Sloan said nothing. The extra 40 pounds was intentional. Everyone knew it. This was not just a mission. It was a test. A gauntlet. Break the woman, watch her fail. Send her home in shame. Chief Holt caught her eye across the room. His weathered face was unreadable, but something flickered there. Concern, maybe. Or recognition. She checked her equipment one final time. The broken rifle sat across her chest, freshly oiled, as ready as she could make it. In her pocket, hidden from view, was the small bottle of CLP. She would nurse this weapon through the jungle. She would keep it alive as long as possible. And when it failed, because it would fail, she would adapt. That was what Mercers did. A Kernetobornam. So, they moved out at 0600. The jungle swallowed them like a living thing. Within minutes, Sloan's uniform was soaked through with sweat. The humidity was suffocating. A wet, heavy blanket that wrapped around her chest and made every breath feel like drowning. Insects swarmed her face, drawn to the salt on her skin. Vines grabbed at her boots with every step. And the weight. God, the weight. 40 extra pounds of radio batteries strapped to her already heavy pack. Her shoulders screamed. Her lower back felt like someone had driven a railroad spike through it. Every step was a negotiation between her body's demand for rest and her will's refusal to give in. Keep up, Mercer. Morrison's voice drifted back from the point position. We are not waiting for you to fix your makeup. Laughter rippled through the formation. Sloan did not respond. She focused on her breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. She focused on placing each foot deliberately, finding solid ground in the treacherous mud. And she focused on the rifle. Even as they marched, her fingers moved over the weapon constantly. She felt for changes in the bolt carrier's resistance. She checked the chamber by touch, making sure it stayed clean. She kept a mental count of how long since she had last applied oil. The jungle wanted to kill this gun almost as much as Vickers did. Humidity was a weapon's worst enemy. It worked into every crevice, every tolerance, every gap. It swelled wooden stocks and corroded metal. It turned lubricant into sludge and made precision parts grind against each other. Sloan would not let it win. Every year, or Mercer. During a brief water break, while the others checked their equipment and exchanged crude jokes, she knelt behind a tree and quietly ministered to her rifle. A drop of oil on the bolt, a wipe of the chamber with a cleaning patch she had hidden in her sleeve. A quick function check of the extractor. Still compromised, still dangerous, but still functional. What are you doing? Sloan looked up. Chief Holt stood over her, his canteen in hand, his expression curious. Maintaining my weapon, Chief. With what? He had noticed the oil bottle in her hand. That is not standard issue. No, Chief, it is not. Holt studied her for a long moment. His eyes moved from the bottle to the rifle to her face. Where did you learn to do that? My grandfather. He was a scout sniper. Korea. Cold War operations after that. Holt's expression changed. Something shifted behind his eyes. What was his name? Emmett Mercer. Silence. Then Holt let out a breath that was half laugh, half disbelief. Emmett Mercer, the Phantom of Chosin. You know that name? Lady, everyone who has ever held a rifle in the United States military knows that name. Your grandfather is a legend. He shook his head slowly. And apparently legends run in the family. He walked away before she could respond. Shaninurman, Surakiturti. They pushed deeper into the jungle. The terrain grew more difficult with every mile. Steep ravines, swollen streams, tangles of vegetation so thick they had to hack their way through with machetes. Sloane's lungs burned. Her legs trembled with exhaustion. The 40 pounds on her back felt like 100. But she did not complain. She did not ask for rest. She did not fall behind. The other operators began to notice. She caught Kowalski watching her during a creek crossing, his expression no longer amused. Morrison stopped making jokes about her makeup. Even Vickers seemed unsettled by her silent endurance. They had expected her to break by now. They had expected tears, complaints, a request to turn back. Instead, they got nothing but quiet determination and the steady rhythm of her boots on the jungle floor. The jungle erupted without warning. One moment there was nothing but the suffocating green silence and the endless drip of moisture from the canopy above. The next moment, the world exploded into chaos. The first RPG screamed out of the tree line and detonated against a mahogany trunk 15 feet from Morrison's position. The blast wave picked him up and threw him backward like a rag doll. Splinters of wood the size of kitchen knives sprayed through the air, shredding leaves and flesh alike. Then the machine guns opened up. Sloan hit the dirt before her conscious mind registered what was happening. 18 years of training took over, driving her body into the mud while her brain was still processing the thunder of automatic weapons fire. Bullets chewed through the vegetation above her head, ripping leaves apart and sending chunks of bark spinning through the humid air. Contact left, contact left. Holt's voice cracked over the radio, raw and desperate. Multiple hostiles, 50 meters. More gunfire, more explosions. This was not a chance encounter. This was a carefully planned ambush, executed with military precision. They had walked straight into a kill zone. Sloan pressed herself flat against the jungle floor. The mud was cool against her cheek, a strange contrast to the heat of fear burning through her veins. Around her, the SEAL team was scrambling for cover, returning fire in short, controlled bursts. But they were outgunned, outnumbered, and completely exposed. How many? Vickers shouted into his radio. I count at least 30. Whitmore's voice came back, pitched high with adrenaline. Maybe more in the trees. They have got us boxed in. Fire from 3 directions. 30 hostiles, maybe more. Against 6 operators and 1 intelligence analyst with a broken rifle. The odds were overwhelming, but something else was wrong. Sloan's mind raced through the intelligence briefings she had studied before the mission. The cartel they were investigating was a drug operation. Smugglers, farmers, not soldiers. These men were not fighting like drug runners. They were fighting like trained professionals. Coordinated fire, overlapping fields of engagement, a prepared ambush site with pre-positioned heavy weapons. This was not a cartel. This was something else entirely. Someone had known they were coming. Someone had prepared this kill zone specifically for them. The realization sent ice through her veins. They had been set up. Their mission parameters had been leaked. Someone had betrayed them. But there was no time to think about that now. Sloan's hand found her weapon. She could feel the familiar weight of it, the cool metal slick with jungle moisture. She thought about the compromised extractor spring, the cracked gas rings, the 100 small failures waiting to happen inside that damaged mechanism. She thought about her grandfather's voice. When your weapon fails, you have 2 seconds to fix it or you are dead. She pushed up onto one knee, brought the rifle to her shoulder, and acquired a target. A cartel fighter was advancing through the tall grass on their left flank. His AK-47 was spitting fire. He was 30 meters away, closing fast. Sloane centered her front sight on his chest, took a breath, and squeezed the trigger between heartbeats. Click. The most terrifying sound a soldier can hear in combat. No bang, no recoil, no round downrange. Just that hollow, empty click of a firing pin striking nothing but dead air. The rifle had jammed. The extractor had failed to pull the spent casing from the chamber, leaving a live round trapped behind a dead one. Exactly as she had predicted. Exactly as Vickers had intended. Time slowed down. Sloane saw the cartel fighter turn toward her position. She saw his weapon swinging around. She saw death coming for her in the form of 7.62 mm rounds. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she could feel Vickers' satisfaction. That smug certainty radiating from him, the confirmation of everything he believed. The proof that she was exactly what he had always said she was. Weak, useless, a liability. Sloane Mercer felt something shift inside her chest. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was something colder, harder, infinitely more dangerous. It was the same feeling she had discovered in herself at 8 years old, when her grandfather first taught her that surrender was not an option. It was refusal. Her hands moved, not with panic, not with desperation, with the precise economical movements her grandfather had drilled into her over 10,000 repetitions. Tap, rack, assess. She slapped the magazine to ensure it was seated. She racked the charging handle, but the bolt would not move. The jam was too severe. The spent casing was wedged in the chamber at an angle, blocking everything. Standard clearance would not work. Sloane adapted. She angled the rifle sideways, letting gravity assist. She ripped the magazine out and let it fall. She drove her thumb into the ejection port, feeling for the jammed casing, finding the edge of the brass with her fingernail. The metal sliced into her skin. Blood welled up immediately, hot and slick. She did not flinch. She hooked her finger around the casing and ripped it out with brute force, tearing her own flesh in the process. The chamber was clear. She slammed the magazine back in. She racked the bolt. She heard the beautiful sound of a round chambering. 3 seconds, maybe less. The cartel fighter had almost completed his turn. His AK was coming up. His finger was on the trigger. Sloane fired first. The round took him in the center of the chest. He staggered backward, surprise frozen on his face, and collapsed into the tall grass. But Sloane was not done. She understood her weapon now. She knew its rhythm, its limitations, its breaking points. The damaged extractor would hold for approximately 3 rounds before failing again. 3 shots, then another jam, then another clearance. She had to make every bullet count. Her eyes swept the left flank. 4 more fighters were pushing through the vegetation, trying to outflank the pinned-down SEALs. They were moving fast, professional, coordinated. In 10 seconds, they would be in position to drop grenades behind the team's cover. Nobody else had seen them. Morrison was down, clutching his bleeding arm. Whitmore was focused on the frontal assault. Kowalski's machine gun was suppressed by enemy fire. Vickers was shouting orders, but his attention was on the main threat, not the flanking maneuver. Only Sloane saw death coming from the side. She rose from cover, not crouching, not hiding. She stood up in the middle of the firefight, fully exposed to the enemy guns, and brought her broken rifle to bear. "Mercer, get down!" Someone screamed her name. Maybe Holt, maybe Vickers. She did not hear them. She heard her grandfather shoot between heartbeats. Her heart was pounding. Adrenaline flooded her system. Her pulse hammered in her ears at 160 beats per minute. But between those beats, there was stillness. Sloane found the stillness. Crack. The first flanker's head snapped back, dead before he hit the ground. The rifle jammed. She cleared it in 2 seconds. Blood from her torn fingers smeared across the ejection port. Crack, crack. 2 more down. center mass. They crumpled into the grass like puppets with cut strings. Jam, clear, crack. The fourth flanker had just raised his weapon to fire. Sloane's bullet caught him in the throat. He spun sideways and fell, his AK-47 discharging uselessly into the canopy. Crack. The fifth man. She had not even seen him until he moved. He had been hiding behind a fallen log, waiting for his moment. Sloane shot him through the eye at 40 meters. 5 targets, 6 seconds. With a broken rifle that jammed twice. Serena Winnie Weniman. Ifuanma. The left flank was clear. Sloane dropped back into cover, her chest heaving, her bloody hand trembling around the grip of her weapon. The rifle was hot, the chamber was fouled. She ejected the spent magazine and reached for her backup. Her fingers found the spare mag Chief Holt had slipped her before the mission. Without those 30 extra rounds, she would have been empty after the third kill. The old chief's quiet act of defiance had just saved her life. And everyone else's on that flank. She slammed the fresh magazine home and scanned for more threats. The enemy fire was slackening. The flanking attack had been their main play, and Sloane had shattered it in 6 seconds. But she knew the battle was not over. These were not amateurs she was facing. The coordinated assault, the prepared positions, the heavy weapon support. Whoever had planned this ambush would have contingencies. She was right. The sound of engines reached her ears. Coming from the north, multiple vehicles. Reinforcements, she muttered. The team was still scattered. Morrison was down with his wounded arm. Kowalski had lost his machine gun in the initial chaos. They needed to regroup, and they needed to do it fast. Sloane made a decision. She broke cover and sprinted toward Vickers' position, zigzagging through the vegetation as bullets snapped past her head. She slid into the mud beside the lieutenant, her broken rifle clutched against her chest. "Sir, we have incoming vehicles from the north. Estimate 3 to 5 minutes before they arrive. We need to consolidate our position and establish a defensive perimeter." Vickers stared at her. She had just dropped 5 men in 6 seconds. She had just diagnosed the tactical situation in the middle of a firefight, and now she was offering tactical recommendations with the calm precision of a seasoned officer. For a moment, he looked like he was going to argue. Then he nodded. "Holt, get everyone to the tree line on our east flank. Kowalski, recover your weapon. Morrison, can you move?" "I can move, sir." Morrison's voice was tight with pain, but there was steel beneath it. "Then move. We are falling back to defensible ground." The team began to consolidate, moving with the disciplined efficiency of professionals under fire. But Sloane knew they were not out of danger yet. "I montun souvenir." What the hell was that? Vickers had crawled over to her position. His face was streaked with mud and sweat. His eyes were wide with something she had never seen there before. Shock, disbelief, and something else. Fear. "Clearing the flank, sir." Sloane's voice was steady, almost calm. 5 hostiles were attempting to outmaneuver our position." Vickers stared at her. Then he looked at the 5 bodies crumpled in the grass. Then he looked back at her, at the blood dripping from her hand, at the battered rifle clutched against her chest. He opened his mouth to say something. The DSHK opened up. The sound was unmistakable. A Russian-made heavy machine gun, probably mounted in a reinforced position somewhere up the hill. The 12.7mm rounds were designed to penetrate light armor, to destroy vehicles, to turn human bodies into unrecognizable meat. And now it was firing directly at them. The first burst shredded the tree trunk Kowalski was hiding behind. Splinters exploded outward. Kowalski screamed and dove sideways, his machine gun abandoned. The second burst walked across the jungle floor toward Holt's position. The old chief barely rolled clear in time, the massive rounds churning the earth inches from his legs. "Heavy gun, 12 o'clock. Whitmore's voice was ragged with terror. "Bunker position on the ridge." Sloane looked up through the chaos and saw it. 200 meters up the hill, partially concealed by camouflage netting and reinforced sandbags, a fortified fighting position. The DSHK's barrel protruded from a narrow firing slit, spitting fire and death down into the valley. The cartel had built a bunker, a real bunker, with overlapping fields of fire and protected sight lines. The kind of defensive position that took weeks to construct and required someone with serious military training to design. This was not a drug-running operation. This was a military installation, and they had walked straight into its kill zone. We need to move, Vickers shouted. Fall back to... Another burst from the DSK cut him off. The rounds punched through the log he was using for cover like it was made of paper. He threw himself flat, cursing. There was nowhere to go. If they stood up, the heavy gun would cut them down. If they stayed, the infantry would regroup and flank them again. They were trapped in a crossfire with no extraction and no support, and ammunition was running low. I cannot get a shot. Garrett, the team's sniper. He was pressed against a boulder, his rifle clutched uselessly to his chest. He is dug in too deep. I cannot see the operator through that slit. Sloan looked at the bunker. 200 meters uphill through dense vegetation, a 4-inch firing slit barely visible through the camouflage. She looked at her broken rifle. It would not make that shot. The barrel was too fouled, too warped from heat and neglect. At 200 meters, she would be lucky to hit the bunker at all, let alone thread a round through a gap the width of her hand. She needed a different weapon. She needed the sniper rifle. Part 3, The Phantom Awakens. Holt was 10 feet to her left, bleeding from a gash across his forehead, but still functional. His eyes met hers across the chaos. Chief! Sloan had to shout over the thunder of gunfire. I need to borrow something. Holt looked at her bloody hand, at the broken rifle, at the 5 bodies she had dropped on the flank. You are insane, he said. Probably. Sloan started crawling toward the sniper's position. Cover me. Holt hesitated for half a heartbeat. Then he swung his weapon toward the tree line and opened fire, creating a wall of suppression that let Sloan move. She reached Garrett in 3 seconds. The young sniper was maybe 25, with wide eyes and shaking hands. This was supposed to be a ghost walk, a simple reconnaissance. He had never expected to be pinned down by a heavy machine gun with death closing in from every direction. Give me the rifle. Sloan did not ask. She commanded. Garrett blinked at her. What? The MK-11, give it to me now. You cannot. He looked at the bunker, at the firing slit, at the impossible shot. Lady, nobody can make that shot. It is 200 meters through vegetation with a 4-inch window. The angle is... Sloan grabbed the rifle out of his hands. The MK-11 was a beautiful weapon. 7.62 NATO, 20-round magazine, effective range of 800 meters in the right hands. It felt solid and true against Sloan's shoulder. A stark contrast to the broken piece of junk she had been carrying. She did not check the scope. She did not use the bipod. She did not take a supported position. She stood up. Mercer! Multiple voices screamed her name. Get down! Get down! The DSHK operator saw her. She could feel his attention shift, feel the massive barrel swinging toward her position. In 2 seconds, maybe 3, a burst of 12.7 millimeter rounds would tear her body apart. She had one shot. She would have one arm. Sloan blocked out the chaos. She blocked out the screaming, the gunfire, the fear. She blocked out Vickers and the team and the cartel fighters in the trees. She went to a place deep inside herself, a place her grandfather had shown her in the Arizona desert, a place where nothing existed except the rifle and the target and the space between heartbeats. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. The shot is not about the gun. The shot is not about the target. The shot is about you, your breathing, your heartbeat, your ability to become perfectly still in a world of chaos. She felt the humidity in the air, 93%. The bullet would fly slightly faster in the thick atmosphere, but it would also drop more due to increased drag. She calculated the adjustment in her head. 2 inches high at this range. She felt the wind on her cheek, 5 miles per hour from the southeast. Barely enough to matter at this range, but she compensated anyway. A 1/4 inch left. The 7.62 NATO round would drift slightly in that crosswind. Not much, maybe an inch at 200 meters. But an inch could be the difference between a kill shot and a miss. She felt the uphill angle, 20 degrees. The bullet would impact high if she aimed center mass. Gravity would have less time to pull the round down during its flight up the slope. She adjusted her point of aim to the lower edge of the firing slit. She felt her heart pounding in her chest. Thump, thump, thump. 160 beats per minute. Adrenaline flooding her system, every instinct screaming at her to take cover, to hide, to run. But between those beats, there was stillness. A fraction of a second, a tiny window of calm in the storm of her own physiology. Her grandfather had trained her to find that window, to live in it, to make it last as long as she needed. Sloane found the stillness. She exhaled slowly, let the air flow out of her lungs without forcing it. The rifle settled against her shoulder. The stock pressed into the pocket of muscle beside her collarbone. Her cheek found the familiar position on the comb. Her finger touched the trigger, not squeezing, not yet, just resting, waiting. The DSHK was almost on her. She could hear the barrel scraping against metal as the operator traversed toward her position. 2 seconds, maybe less. Between her heartbeats in that infinite decimal moment of stillness, she squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The round screamed across 200 meters of jungle, punching through leaves and branches, rising on its ballistic arc before dropping toward the bunker. It passed through the 4-inch firing slit like thread through a needle, and it struck the DSHK operator directly between the eyes. The heavy machine gun fell silent. For a moment, nobody moved. The jungle held its breath. Even the cartel fighters seemed frozen, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Then Holt's voice cut through the silence. Holy Mother of God. Spell broke. Vickers was on his feet, shouting orders. Push forward before they regroup. Move! 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 The team surged up the hill. Without the heavy gun to pin them down, the surviving cartel fighters began to scatter. They had expected an easy slaughter, trapped prey in their carefully designed kill zone. They had not expected a woman with a broken rifle to drop 5 men in 6 seconds and then thread a bullet through an impossible gap to kill their heavy gunner. They ran. The SEALs pursued, eliminating their remaining hostiles with brutal efficiency. Within 3 minutes, the ambush was over. The jungle fell quiet again, the silence broken only by the moans of wounded men and the distant cry of startled birds. Sloane stood alone in the middle of the kill zone. The sniper rifle was still clutched in her hands. Her finger was still bleeding. Her heart was still pounding. Her entire body trembled with the aftershocks of adrenaline and terror and something else. Triumph. She had done it. She had taken the broken rifle Vickers had given her, the weapon designed to make her fail, and she had turned it into a tool of survival. She had killed 5 men with a gun that jammed twice. She had made an impossible shot that no one believed could be made. She had proven them all wrong. But as the adrenaline faded and the reality of what she had done began to sink in, Sloane felt no joy, no satisfaction, only a hollow exhaustion and the weight of lives taken on her conscience. This was what her grandfather had trained her for. This was the purpose of all those summers in the desert, all those hours of blindfolded practice, all that pain and blood and determination. Not glory, not recognition. Survival. Holt appeared at her side. Blood still trickled from the gash on his forehead, mixing with sweat and mud to paint strange patterns across his weathered face. He looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. Respect. Real respect, earned in blood and fire. That shot, he said quietly. I have been in this business for 20 years. I have never seen anything like that. Sloane did not respond. She was staring at the bunker up the hill, at the silent DSHK, at the body of the man she had killed with a single perfect round. Where did you learn to shoot like that? My grandfather. The words came out automatically, without thought. Master Gunnery Sergeant Emmett Mercer. He was a scout sniper in Korea. Holt nodded slowly. The Phantom of Chosin, I thought so. He reached out and placed his weathered hand on her shoulder. Hell of a thing, Mercer. You are a damn credit to your grandfather. Ari Katkartster wanta turbanashu. The Black Hawk touched down in a storm of rotor wash and flying debris. Sloane climbed aboard with the rest of the team, her boots slick with mud and blood. She found a seat near the door and strapped in, letting the vibration of the aircraft wash over her exhausted body. The jungle fell away beneath them. The kill zone shrank to a green smudge. then disappeared entirely as the helicopter climbed toward the clouds. Sloane closed her eyes. She could still feel the rifle in her hands. She could still hear the click of the jam, the crack of her shots, the distant thunder of the heavy gun falling silent. She could still feel her grandfather's presence, like a ghost standing at her shoulder, nodding with grim approval. Siri Washington. The helicopter was silent. No one spoke. No one joked. No one exchanged the usual post-mission banter that followed a successful extraction. The Black Hawk's rotors beat a steady rhythm overhead, filling the cabin with white noise. But beneath that mechanical thunder, there was nothing but the weight of what had just happened. Sloane sat near the open door, her boots dangling over the jungle canopy 3,000 feet below. The wind whipped at her face, cold and clean after the suffocating humidity of the valley. Her hand throbbed where she had torn it, clearing the jam. She had wrapped it in a field dressing, but blood was already seeping through the gauze, staining it a deep crimson that matched the sunset bleeding across the western sky. Around her, the SEALs sat in their jump seats with their heads down, their weapons across their laps, their eyes fixed on the floor or the walls or their own bloody hands. These men who had laughed at her, mocked her, treated her like dead weight for 3 solid weeks. Now they could not meet her gaze. Movement caught her eye. Lieutenant Dalton Vickers was unbuckling his harness, pushing himself up from his seat with obvious effort. His uniform was torn and muddy. His face was pale beneath the grime of combat. He moved carefully across the vibrating floor of the helicopter, one hand gripping the cargo netting for balance, until he stood in front of her. Sloane looked up at him. She expected anger. She expected resentment. She expected him to find some way to diminish what she had done, to reclaim his authority, to reassert the natural order that she had so thoroughly disrupted. What she saw instead surprised her. His eyes were red-rimmed. His jaw was tight. His whole body seemed to vibrate with an emotion she could not immediately identify. Then he reached down and picked up the broken rifle from where it lay beside her seat. He held it in both hands, staring at it like he had never seen it before, like it was a foreign object from another world. Slowly, deliberately, he turned and threw it out the open door of the helicopter. The rifle tumbled through the air, spinning end over end, shrinking to a black speck against the green jungle below, before disappearing entirely into the canopy. Gone. Destroyed. Erased from existence like the sabotage it represented. Vickers turned back to face her. Mercer. His voice was barely audible over the rotor noise. She saw rather than heard him form her name. She waited. Vickers opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Whatever words he was searching for seemed to be caught somewhere deep in his chest, tangled up with pride and shame and the terrible weight of what he had done. Finally he spoke. I was wrong. 3 words. Simple, direct. But from a man like Dalton Vickers, they might as well have been a full confession written in blood. About the gear. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. About you, about everything. Sloane said nothing. She let the silence stretch. Let him feel the full weight of it. That rifle was meant to fail. The words came out rough, forced. I pulled it from the disposal pile. I knew the extractor was shot. I knew the gas rings were cracked. I gave it to you because I wanted you to fail. I wanted you to wash out. I wanted to prove that women do not belong in the teams. The confession hung in the air between them, ugly and naked. Around the helicopter, the other men had stopped pretending not to listen. They watched the exchange with expressions ranging from shock to discomfort to grim acknowledgement. They had all known, they had all been complicit, and now they were all witnesses to their lieutenant's reckoning. I could have gotten you killed. Vickers's voice cracked. I could have gotten all of us killed. Because I was so goddamn sure that I knew what you were, I never bothered to find out who you actually are. He extended his hand. Sloane looked at it. This hand that had thrown her a broken rifle. This hand that had signed her death warrant in the armory of Fob Jaguar. This hand that belonged to a man who had tried to destroy her simply because of what she represented. She thought about refusing. She thought about everything he had done. Every insult, every obstacle, every cruel smile. She thought about the way he had laughed when her weapon jammed, secure in the knowledge that his sabotage had worked. She thought about her grandfather. Revenge is a poison, Emmett Mercer had told her once. Long ago, in the quiet of his Arizona workshop, you drink it hoping it will hurt your enemy, but it only destroys you. The strongest thing you can do to someone who tried to break you is to show them that you are unbreakable. Forgive them, not because they deserve it, but because you refuse to carry their weight. Sloan reached up and took Vickers' hand. His grip was firm but careful, like he was holding something precious that he did not quite trust himself not to drop. Just doing my job, sir. It was not forgiveness, not exactly, but it was a beginning. Not to Namaniman Ian or not to. Vickers nodded once sharply and released her hand. He started to turn away, then stopped. Those two men, his voice was quiet now, on the flank, the ones you dropped with your last rounds. What about them? They were coming up behind my position. His voice was barely a whisper. I never saw them. If you had not stood up, if you had not taken that shot with a rifle that was jamming every 3 rounds, they would have killed me. He held her gaze for a long moment. You saved my life with a weapon I gave you to fail. A pause. I will not forget that, Mercer, ever. Then he said something that changed everything. There is something else you should know. Vickers's face had shifted again. The guilt was still there, but now it was layered with something else. Something that looked almost like wonder. 20 years ago, when I was a green lieutenant who thought I knew everything, I went through a classified training program at a facility in Nevada. 6 months of the hardest instruction I have ever experienced. Sloan listened. There was an old man there, a retired Marine. They brought him in as a special instructor for advanced marksmanship. He was the hardest, meanest, most exacting trainer I had ever encountered. He broke down every piece of arrogance I had brought with me, rebuilt me from the ground up. Vickers shook his head slowly. He had this saying, something he repeated every time one of us screwed up. Sloan felt her heart stop. She knew what was coming before he said it. Mercers do not break. We bend the world until it fits us. Vickers met her eyes. His name was Emmett Mercer. He never mentioned having family, never talked about anything personal, but he was the best instructor I ever had. The helicopter seemed to shrink around them. The rotor noise faded to nothing. I spent 3 weeks trying to wash out the granddaughter of the man who made me the operator I am today. Vickers's voice was heavy with something that sounded almost like awe. He must be laughing his ass off right now. Despite everything, Sloan felt the corner of her mouth twitch upward. He does not laugh much. But yeah, he would probably appreciate the irony. Vickers reached into his cargo pocket and pulled out a key. He pressed it into Sloan's hand. Armory Locker 17. There's a brand new MK-18 Mod 1 in there. Fresh from the factory, 0 rounds through it. Best weapon in the inventory. He met her eyes. It is yours, personally assigned. Nobody touches it but you. Sloan looked at the key in her hand. Then she looked at Vickers. Thank you, sir. You earned it. The field hospital was quiet when Sloan arrived. The smell hit her first, antiseptic and blood, the familiar scent of places where life and death negotiated their boundaries. Morrison was sedated, sleeping off the surgery that had removed shrapnel from his arm. The other wounded had been treated and released. Only one bed was still occupied. Chief Petty Officer Brennan Holt sat propped up against the pillows, his head wrapped in fresh bandages, an IV drip feeding fluids into his weathered arm. He looked older than he had that morning, like the day had added years to his already considerable burden. 20 years of combat operations had left their mark on him, the scars visible and invisible, the weight of every friend he had lost, every decision he had made, every moment when the line between life and death had been measured in milliseconds. But when he saw Sloan in the doorway, his tired face split into a genuine smile. Ghost. He said it like a name. Get your ass in here. She walked over and sat in the chair beside his bed. The plastic was cold against her legs. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. How is the head, Chief? Hard as ever. Takes more than a piece of shrapnel to crack this old skull. He shifted in the bed, wincing slightly. Heard Vickers gave you the new MK-18. Word travels fast. Always does. This base is like a small town, Everyone knows everyone else's business within about 5 minutes. Holt studied her for a long moment. His eyes were sharp despite the painkillers, evaluating, assessing, the same way he had been watching her since the first day she arrived. You know what they are calling you now? The whole base is talking about it. Calling me what? Ghost. The old chief's smile widened. The ghost of Mercer. Because you appeared out of nowhere, dropped 5 men like they were nothing, made an impossible shot, and then vanished back into the smoke before anyone could figure out what the hell just happened. Sloane shook her head. I did not vanish. Does not matter what actually happened. What matters is the story. And the story is that SEAL Team 7 has a ghost now. A shooter so good she can kill you with a broken rifle and a prayer. Holt's expression turned serious. You earned that name today, Mercer. You earned it in blood. Do not let anyone take it from you. She thought about her grandfather, about the nicknames he had earned in the frozen hills of Korea, in the shadowed corridors of Cold War operations, the Phantom of Chosin, the ghost who walked through enemy lines like they were not even there. Thank you, Chief. For the magazine. Holt waved his hand dismissively. That was nothing. It was not nothing. Sloane leaned forward. You were the only one who did not laugh. The only one who showed me any kindness at all. That magazine saved my life out there. Without those extra 30 rounds, I would have been empty after the third kill on that flank. Might have saved all our lives. Holt corrected. If you had run out of ammunition, those 5 bastards would have rolled us up like a cheap carpet. He paused. I am just glad I trusted my gut. What did your gut tell you? That you were not what you appeared to be. The old chief leaned back against his pillows, his eyes distant for a moment. You know, I have seen a lot of operators come through these teams over the years. The loud ones who talk big and crumble under pressure. The quiet ones who surprise everyone when things go sideways. But I have never seen anyone quite like you. He turned to look at her directly. When you stood up in the middle of that firefight, when you started dropping targets with a weapon that should have gotten you killed, I realized something. You were not just surviving. You were executing. Every movement deliberate, every shot calculated, like you had done it 1,000 times before. He shook his head slowly. That kind of skill does not come from naval intelligence training. That comes from somewhere deeper, something in the blood. He reached out and placed his weathered hand on her shoulder. Hell of a thing, Ghost. You are a damn credit to your grandfather. Un mesi worry. The call came through at 2200 hours. Sloane sat alone in her corner of the barracks. The hanging sheet was still there, still separating her from the rest of the team. But somehow it felt different now. Less like a barrier, more like a door that had finally been opened. Her satellite phone buzzed. A number she knew by heart. She answered on the second ring. Hey, Grandpa. There was a long pause. Then Emmett Mercer's voice came through, rough as gravel and warm as a desert sunset. Heard you had an interesting day. Sloane almost laughed. News travels fast. I still have friends in the community. Friends who call me when something unusual happens. Like my granddaughter standing up in the middle of a firefight and dropping 5 men with a jam rifle before making an impossible sniper shot. Another pause. They say you cleared the malfunction in under 3 seconds. That true? Yes, sir, sir. Using the technique I taught you, tap, rack, assess, then manual extraction when the casing would not clear. Sloane looked down at her bandaged hand. Cut my finger pretty bad. Wounds heal, skills remain. Emmett's voice was steady. That is what matters. Silence on the line. Then quietly, I am proud of you, little one. The words hit her harder than she expected. In all the years of training, all the hours of practice, all the blood and sweat and tears she had poured into becoming the shooter her grandfather had shaped her to be, she could count on one hand the number of times he had said those words. Thank you, Grandpa. Do not thank me. You did the work. You faced the test. You proved what you are made of. His voice carried the weight of decades. Wars fought, friends lost, lessons learned in blood. But I need you to understand something, Sloane. Today was just the beginning. What do you mean? You proved you can shoot. That is the easy part. Any skilled operator can pull a trigger. The hard part is what comes next. Emmett paused, and when he spoke again, His voice was heavy with something that sounded almost like warning. Now they see you. Now they know what you are capable of. And that means they are going to expect more. They are going to put more weight on your shoulders, more responsibility on your back, more lives in your hands. I can handle it. I know you can. That is not what worries me. Another pause. What worries me is whether you are ready to lead, because that is where this path takes you, little one. Not just shooting, not just surviving, but standing at the front and making decisions that determine whether other people live or die. Sloan thought about Vickers, about Holt, about the men who had laughed at her 3 weeks ago, and now looked at her with something approaching awe. I do not know if I am ready for that. Good. Emmett's voice carried a note of approval. The day you think you are ready is the day you become dangerous. Not to your enemies, to your own people. He took a breath. I have seen it happen, little one. I have seen good men and women get promoted beyond their experience because they did something heroic. And I have seen them crack under the weight of command. Not because they were not brave, but because bravery and leadership are two different things. What is the difference? Bravery is standing up when bullets are flying. Leadership is deciding who stands where before the first shot is fired. Bravery is saving your own life. Leadership is accepting responsibility for everyone else's. Emmett paused. In Korea, I was the best shooter in my unit, maybe in the whole division. I could put a round through a man's eye at 800 yards in a snowstorm, but for the longest time, they would not promote me. You know why? Why? Because I was too focused on my own skill. I thought being the best meant being the leader. It does not. Being the leader means making everyone else better. It means putting the mission before your ego and your people before yourself. Stay humble, Sloan. Stay hungry, and remember what I taught you. Which part? All of it. The old man's voice softened slightly. But especially this. The strongest weapon you will ever carry is not a rifle. It is not a knife. It is not your training or your skills or your ability to put rounds on target. The strongest weapon you will ever carry is the trust of the people who stand beside you. Earn it, protect it, never betray it. I will not, Grandpa. I know you will not. Pride resonated through the satellite connection, reaching across thousands of miles to wrap around her like a blanket. Now get some sleep, Ghost. You have got a long road ahead of you. The line went dead. Sloan sat in the darkness for a long time, holding the silent phone, thinking about everything that had changed and everything that was still to come. Then she lay down on her cot, closed her eyes, and let the exhaustion finally take her. It's The next morning, Sloan walked into the team briefing room and found every seat taken except one. The chair at the front of the table, right next to Lieutenant Vickers. The men of SEAL Team 7 looked up as she entered. Morrison, his arm in a sling but his eyes clear. Whitmore no longer avoiding her gaze. Kowalski, who nodded once with something that looked almost like deference. Garrett, the young sniper, who watched her with undisguised admiration. And Holt, his head still bandaged, smiling his knowing smile. Mercer? Vickers gestured to the empty seat. Sit down. We have got a new mission briefing. She sat. Vickers tapped a control and a map appeared on the screen behind him. A different jungle, a different valley, a different set of targets. Intel suggests a high-value target is moving through this region in the next 48 hours. We have been tasked with interdiction. He looked around the table, his gaze finally settling on Sloan. Given recent events, I have restructured our tactical approach. Mercer will be designated marksman for this operation. Official position, not attached support. The room was silent. Any objections? Nobody spoke. Good. The lieutenant allowed himself a small smile. Then let us get to work. Ghost, you are on Overwatch. Show us what you have got. Sloan looked around the table at the men who had once wanted her to fail. Men who had laughed at her, mocked her, dismissed her as dead weight. Men who now waited for her input with something that looked almost like anticipation. She thought about her grandfather. She thought about the lessons forged in Arizona heat. She thought about the moment she first understood what it meant to be a Mercer. She thought about the broken rifle spinning end over end, disappearing into the jungle canopy. She thought about the 6 bodies in the tall grass, the silent bunker on the ridge, The impossible shot that had changed everything. Understood, sir. Her voice was steady, confident. I will not let you down. Vickers met her eyes. I know you will not, Ghost. That is why you are here. Arawa, Nero 11. And for the first time since she had arrived at FOB Jaguar, Sloan Mercer felt like she finally belonged. Not because they had accepted her, but because she had accepted herself. She was a shooter, a warrior, a ghost who walked through fire and came out the other side. She was her grandfather's legacy made flesh. The Phantom of Chosin had walked through fire in 1952. 70 years later, his granddaughter had done the same. Different jungle, different war, same unbreakable spirit. And she was just getting started. It Freixeria want to worry Anton. Somewhere in Arizona, in a small house at the edge of the desert, an old man sat in his workshop surrounded by rifles and memories. Master Gunnery Sergeant Emmett Mercer, the Phantom of Chosin, held a worn photograph in his weathered hands. A young girl, 8 years old, standing in the desert with blood on her fingers and a newly assembled rifle in her arms. Her face was streaked with tears and sand, but her eyes were shining with something that could not be taught. Will, determination, the unbreakable spirit of a Mercer. The old man looked at the photograph for a long time. His workshop was filled with the artifacts of a lifetime spent in service. Rifles he had carried through Korea, pistols from operations that never officially happened, medals in boxes that would never be opened, letters from men who had served beside him, most of them dead now, taken by war or time or the weight of memories too heavy to carry. On the wall hung a flag, folded into a triangle, given to him by a Marine Corps honor guard at his son's funeral. His only child, killed in an accident that had nothing to do with war. Just a drunk driver on a highway in Texas. No enemy to fight, no battle to win, just random, senseless loss. His daughter-in-law had remarried a few years later, moved to the East Coast, took little Sloan with her, but every summer she sent the girl back to Arizona. Every summer, Emmett Mercer had poured everything he knew into that small, fierce child, not because he wanted her to be a soldier, because he wanted her to be ready. Ready for a world that did not care about fairness. Ready for enemies that showed no mercy. Ready for the moment when everything she loved would depend on her ability to remain calm, to think clearly, to act decisively. Ready to survive. And now, 70 years after he had walked through Chinese lines in the frozen darkness of Chosin, his granddaughter had walked through fire of her own. She had not broken. She had not bent. She had proven, in blood and bullets, that the Mercer legacy was alive and well. The old man set the photograph down gently on his workbench, next to the medals he had earned in wars that would never be acknowledged, and he smiled. It was the second time in his life he had smiled because of his granddaughter. He had a feeling it would not be the last. He reached for his coffee mug, the same one he had used for 40 years, stained brown from decades of strong black coffee. The ceramic was warm in his hands. Outside, the Arizona sun was setting over the mountains, the same mountains where he had once taught a terrified 8-year-old girl that pain was just information, that surrender was never an option, that Mercers do not break. She had learned well. She had learned better than he could have ever hoped. And now the world knew her name. Ghost. The ghost of Mercer. His legacy, walking through fire. Emmett Mercer stood up slowly, his old joints protesting the movement. He walked to the window and looked out at the desert, painted gold and red by the dying sun. Somewhere out there, thousands of miles away, his granddaughter was preparing for another mission. Another test, another chance to prove what she was made of. He did not worry about her. She was a Mercer, and Mercers do not break. They bend the world until it fits them, just like his granddaughter had done today, just like she would do tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day for the rest of her life. Because that was what Mercers did. They survived, they endured, they prevailed, and somewhere in a Colombian jungle, far from the Arizona desert where it all began, a woman they called Ghost was proving it all over again.